The sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Harriet Norwood wiped sweat from her brow, cursing herself for taking the shortcut through Rattlesnake Gulch. She'd been warned about this treacherous stretch of land outside Colorado City, Colorado Territory, but the year 1875 was proving difficult for a woman traveling alone, and she'd been desperate to reach town before nightfall. Now, with her horse spooked and fled, and the ground beneath her feet suddenly transforming from solid to something sinister, Harriet realized her terrible mistake. "Help!" she cried out, her voice echoing through the canyon as she sank inch by terrifying inch into the quicksand. The more she struggled, the faster she descended, the wet sand now reaching her waist. Panic seized her as she contemplated dying alone in this desolate place, her 22 years of life ending in such a cruel manner. In the distance, a lone figure appeared atop the ridge, silhouetted against the brilliant blue sky. Harriet waved frantically, her voice hoarse from screaming, praying the stranger would see her before it was too late. "Stay still," a deep voice commanded as the man urged his horse down the slope with remarkable speed. As he drew closer, Harriet noticed something unusual about his silhouette. He had only one arm. The rider dismounted with practiced ease despite his disability, quickly assessing the situation. "Name's Finn Archer," he said, his voice calm and steady. "And I reckon you've found yourself in a mighty unpleasant situation, madam." "Please," Harriet begged, trying to keep still as the quicksand continued its insidious pull. "I cannot swim, and I fear I may not have much time." Finn worked methodically, removing his worn leather belt and reaching out toward her. "Grab hold and don't let go," he instructed, stretching his single arm as far as possible. His face remained focused, showing no strain despite the obvious difficulty of the task. Harriet clutched the belt, her knuckles white with desperation. With strength that belied his lean frame, Finn began to pull, anchoring himself against his horse. The quicksand reluctantly relinquished its prey, and after several agonizing minutes of careful maneuvering, Harriet found herself on solid ground, trembling and covered in mud, but alive. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at her rescuer properly for the first time. Finn Archer was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-weathered skin and intelligent blue eyes that contrasted sharply with his dark hair. His empty left sleeve was pinned neatly at the shoulder, but there was nothing diminished about his presence. If anything, the absence seemed to magnify his quiet strength. "You're twice the man of any other," Harriet said impulsively, then blushed at her own boldness. A rare smile crossed Finn's face, transforming his serious countenance. "That's generous, considering I'm working with half the usual equipment." He helped her to her feet. "Where were you headed before this gulch decided to try and swallow you whole?" "Colorado City," Harriet replied, attempting to brush the worst of the mud from her once fine traveling dress. "I have teaching position at the new schoolhouse." Finn nodded, helping her onto his horse. "Then we best get you there, Mississippi?" "Norwood. Harriet Norwood." "Well, Miss Norwood, hold tight. Quicksand's the least of your worries in these parts." As they rode double on his sturdy bay, Harriet found herself acutely aware of the solid warmth of the man in front of her. Despite her near-death experience, she felt a curious flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. She had come west for a fresh start after the disappointments of Philadelphia society, but she hadn't expected that new beginning would involve being rescued by a one-armed cowboy who, in those few moments of crisis, had shown more capability and courage than any gentleman she'd ever known back east. Colorado City emerged on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the line between civilization and wilderness. The settlement had grown considerably since gold was discovered in the nearby mountains, but it still maintained the raw, unfinished quality of a frontier town. "The schoolhouse is just past the general store," Finn informed her as they rode down the main street, drawing curious glances from townspeople unaccustomed to seeing the solitary cowboy with a mud-covered woman riding behind him. "How do you know that?" Harriet asked, surprised. "My sister was on the committee that hired you," he replied. "Eliza runs the boarding house where you'll be staying. The whole town's been talking about the refined Eastern lady coming to teach our children." Harriet felt a jolt of recognition. "Eliza Archer? I've corresponded with her." "I had no idea she was your sister." "Half-sister," Finn corrected. "Different mothers. Same no-good father who abandoned us both." There was no bitterness in his voice, merely a statement of fact. They stopped in front of a 2-story clapboard building with a freshly painted sign, "Archer Boarding House." Eliza herself emerged onto the porch, a tall woman with the same striking blue eyes as her brother. Her expression shifted from surprise to concern as she took in Harriet's bedraggled appearance. "Good heavens! What happened?" Eliza rushed forward to help Harriet dismount. "Your brother saved my life," Harriet said simply, still feeling shaky on her feet. "I foolishly attempted a shortcut through Rattlesnake Gulch and found myself in Quicksand." Eliza shot her brother a grateful look. "Thank God you were out riding that way today." Finn tipped his hat. "Just happened to be in the right place." He turned his horse to leave, but Harriet impulsively reached out to touch his arm. "Mr. Archer, thank you again. I owe you my life." His eyes met hers briefly. "Welcome to Colorado, Miss Norwood. It ain't always gentle with newcomers, but it has its moments." With that cryptic statement, he rode away, leaving Harriet staring after him. "Come inside, dear," Eliza said kindly. "Let's get you cleaned up and settled. You've had quite an introduction to our little corner of the world." As Harriet soaked in a copper tub later that evening, washing away the last traces of her ordeal, she found her thoughts returning to Finn Archer. There was something compelling about the quiet cowboy that went beyond his heroic rescue. She wondered about his missing arm, about the life he led, and most troubling of all, why the mere memory of his steadfast presence made her heart beat faster. Little did she know that Finn Archer was equally unable to banish thoughts of the brave Eastern schoolteacher from his mind as he rode back to his modest ranch outside town. The Colorado mountain summer was in full bloom as Harriet stood before her classroom of 23 pupils ranging from 6 to 16 years old. Despite having been in town for only 2 weeks, she'd quickly adapted to the rhythm of her new life. The children, initially wary of their Eastern teacher with her fancy ways, had warmed to her genuine interest in their lives and her willingness to adjust her teaching to include practical knowledge relevant to their frontier existence. "Miss Norwood, is it true you nearly died in Quicksand and Mr. Archer saved you with just one arm?" asked 8-year-old Thomas Wilkins during the lunch break. Harriet smiled patiently. "Yes, Thomas. Mr. Archer was very brave and skilled. It's a reminder that we should never judge someone's abilities by appearances. Pa says Mr. Archer was the best horse trainer in the territory before the war took his arm," piped up Jenny Miller, a bright-eyed 10-year-old. "Says it's a crying shame he keeps to himself so much now." "That's quite enough gossip," Harriet gently chided, though she filed away this information. She had seen Finn only once since her arrival, a glimpse of him loading supplies into his wagon outside the general store. He had nodded politely in her direction but made no attempt to speak with her, leaving Harriet with an unexpected feeling of disappointment. Later that afternoon, as Harriet was organizing books after the children had departed, a shadow fell across the schoolroom door. "Miss Norwood." Finn stood awkwardly at the threshold, hat in hand. "My sister mentioned you needed some shelves built." Harriet's heart performed an undignified leap in her chest. "Mr. Archer." "Yes, that would be most helpful. The children's readers are currently stacked on the floor." He entered the room, surveying the space with a practiced eye. "I can have them done by week's end. Figured I owed you a proper welcome to town beyond fishing you out of Quicksand." You owe me nothing, Harriet replied. If anything, I remain in your debt. Finn's mouth quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. No debts between neighbors, Miss Norwood. That's the way we do things out here. Then perhaps you'll join my class one day, she suggested. I'm teaching the children about the war between the states next week, and a veteran's perspective would be invaluable. A shadow crossed his face. I don't much talk about the war, madam. I understand, Harriet said quickly, regretting her presumptuousness. It was merely a thought. An awkward silence fell between them until Finn cleared his throat. Town's having a social on Saturday. Dance and potluck at the meeting hall. As the new schoolteacher, folks will expect you there. Will you be attending? The question escaped before Harriet could think better of it. Don't much care for crowds, he replied, shifting uncomfortably. Or dancing, for obvious reasons. He gestured to his empty sleeve. I imagine that in a place where every hand is needed for survival, people would value strength of character over physical completeness, Harriet observed, meeting his gaze directly. Something flickered in those blue eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. You have some uncommon notions for a lady from Philadelphia, Miss Norwood. I found conventional thinking rather limiting, she replied with a small smile. It's partly why I came west. Finn studied her for a moment longer than was strictly proper. I'll bring the lumber for those shelves tomorrow, he finally said, settling his hat back on his head. Good day, Miss Norwood. As he left, Harriet realized she was clutching her lesson book so tightly her knuckles had turned white. There was something about Finn Archer that unsettled her carefully constructed composure, something that made her feel both vulnerable and strangely alive. True to his word, Finn returned the next day with lumber and tools. Harriet taught her classes while he worked quietly in the corner, constructing sturdy shelves with remarkable efficiency despite having only one hand. She found herself stealing glances at him throughout the day, admiring the deft way he managed tasks that would challenge even a two-armed man. How did you lose it? She finally asked during the midday break, when the children were outside playing. Your arm, was it during the war? Finn paused in his work, his back to her. For a moment, she thought he would ignore the question or perhaps even leave. But then his shoulders relaxed slightly. Gettysburg, he said, his voice low. Confederate artillery. I was a cavalry scout for the Union. He turned to face her. I was one of the lucky ones. Made it home. I'm sorry, Harriet said sincerely. It must have been difficult to adjust. Had my moments of feeling sorry for myself, Finn admitted, returning to his work. Found out pretty quick that self-pity's a luxury a man can't afford out here. You adapt or you die. Is that why you became so skilled with horses? Adaptation. He glanced at her with surprise. You've been asking about me. Harriet felt a blush creep up her neck. People talk. They say you have a way with even the most difficult animals. Had a way with them before the war, he corrected. After. Well, took some figuring, but horses don't judge a man by how many arms he's got. They judge by confidence and respect. He hammered a nail with practiced precision. Something people could learn from. The children admire you, Harriet ventured, especially after hearing how you rescued their new teacher. A genuine smile briefly transformed his serious face. Kids are generally fair-minded until adults teach them otherwise. By late afternoon, the shelves were completed, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship that transformed the schoolroom. As Finn gathered his tools, Harriet approached him with a small envelope. For your work, she explained, extending it toward him. Finn made no move to take it. I didn't do this for payment. Then consider it a donation to the school, she countered. Pride goes both ways, Mr. Archer. Allow me the dignity of not being indebted. After a moment's hesitation, He accepted the envelope with a nod. "Reckon we're even now, Miss Norwood." "Not quite," she replied with unexpected boldness. "You've still saved my life, built these magnificent shelves, and haven't yet agreed to attend the social on Saturday." That startled a laugh from him, a rich, genuine sound that Harriet immediately wanted to hear again. "You're persistent. I'll give you that. A necessary quality for a teacher," she replied, smiling. "Particularly one dealing with reluctant students." "Is that what I am? A student? We all have something to learn from each other, don't you think?" Finn studied her with those penetrating blue eyes. "I'll consider the social," he finally said. "Can't promise more than that." It was enough to send a thrill of anticipation through Harriet that lasted the rest of the week. Saturday evening found Harriet nervously adjusting her best dress, a modest blue cotton with lace trim that she'd saved for special occasions. Eliza had helped style her auburn hair in a fashionable arrangement, and had even insisted on lending her a pair of pearl earrings. "You look lovely," Eliza assured her as they walked together toward the meeting hall. "Half the eligible men in town will be vying for a dance." "I'm not interested in causing a stir," Harriet protested, though her eyes scanned the gathering crowd for a particular figure. "Of course not," Eliza replied with knowing amusement. "Though I couldn't help but notice you've taken quite an interest in my brother's comings and goings." Harriet felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Archer has been very kind in helping me adjust to Colorado City." "Finn hasn't volunteered to help anyone in years," Eliza said more seriously. "Not since he came back from the war." "Whatever you said to him, it made an impression." Before Harriet could respond, they entered the brightly lit meeting hall, which had been transformed with bunting and wildflowers for the occasion. A small band played lively tunes while couples twirled across the wooden floor, and tables laden with food lined one wall. Nearly the entire town had turned out, creating a festive atmosphere that immediately lifted Harriet's spirits. Several of her students ran up to greet her, followed by their parents eager to meet the teacher who had so quickly won their children's affection. Harriet found herself drawn into conversation after conversation, introduced to what seemed like the entire population of Colorado City and its surroundings. Yet all the while, she found herself glancing toward the door. An hour into the festivities, she had almost given up hope when a murmur ran through the crowd. Finn Archer stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable but determined in a clean shirt and vest that couldn't quite disguise his lean, hardened physique. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he'd clearly made an effort with his appearance, though he seemed ready to bolt at any moment. His eyes found hers across the room, and Harriet felt a connection that defied the distance between them. Taking a deep breath, she excused herself from her current conversation and made her way toward him. "You came," she said simply when she reached him. "Said I'd consider it," he replied, a hint of warmth in his eyes. "Figured a man should keep his word." "I'm glad," Harriet said, suddenly feeling uncharacteristically shy. "Would you like some punch, Mrs. Peterson makes it with wild berries." "Lead the way," he said, following her through the crowd that subtly parted before them, curious eyes tracking their progress. They found a relatively quiet corner where they could observe the dancing while sipping punch. Harriet noted how Finn positioned himself with his back to the wall, maintaining a clear view of all entrances, the habits of a cavalry scout apparently never fully abandoned. "Your shelves are the envy of every teacher in the county," Harriet told him, trying to ease his obvious discomfort with the social setting. "Mrs. Wilson from the next town over visited yesterday specifically to admire them." "It was good to work with my hands again," Finn admitted. "Been too long since I built something useful." "What do you do on your ranch?" Harriet asked, genuinely curious. "Beyond training horses, bit of everything. Raise some cattle. Grow enough to feed myself and have some left to sell." Mostly I break horses that others can't manage. A touch of pride entered his voice. Got a reputation for rehabilitating the ones other trainers give up on. The wounded souls, Harriet murmured. You understand them. Finn gave her a sharp look. They're just animals, Miss Norwood. I don't believe you think that, she challenged gently. Not from the way you speak about them. Before he could respond, the music changed to a slower waltz, and an uncomfortable expression crossed his face as couples began moving onto the dance floor. I should probably leave you to enjoy your evening, he said, starting to rise. Plenty of fellows would be happy to partner with the prettiest schoolteacher Colorado's ever seen. Mr. Archer, Harriet said firmly, placing her hand on his arm. I came here hoping to spend time with you. If you truly wish to leave, I won't stop you, but please don't do so on my account. He stared at her in genuine bewilderment. Why would you want to spend time with a broken-down cowboy when there's a room full of whole men to choose from? Because none of them saved my life, she replied with a smile. And because I find you far more interesting than any man I've met since arriving in Colorado. A flicker of something that might have been hope crossed his face, quickly suppressed. Can't dance with you, he said gruffly. Wouldn't want to embarrass you. Then let's walk outside, Harriet suggested impulsively. It's a beautiful night, and I've been told the view of the stars from here is unmatched in the east. After a moment's hesitation, Finn nodded. They slipped out a side door, escaping the crowded hall for the quiet tranquility of the summer evening. The mountain air was cool but pleasant, and the sky above was indeed a magnificent canopy of stars unobscured by city smoke or fog. It's breathtaking, Harriet whispered, tipping her head back to take in the celestial display. Used to navigate by them during the war, Finn said, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Star patterns saved my life more than once. And now you've saved mine, she replied, turning to face him. Mr. Archer Finn, I hope you know how truly grateful I am. Harriet. He said her name for the first time, his voice low and intimate in the darkness. Any man would have done the same. Perhaps, she conceded. But it wasn't any man. It was you. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of the connection that had been building since their first encounter. Finn took a half-step closer, then hesitated. I'm not the kind of man a lady like you should be walking out with, he said, conflict evident in his expression. Got nothing to offer but a hard life and a body that's not even complete. You presume to know what I want, Harriet replied with spirit. I came west to escape people who thought they knew better than I did about my own life and happiness. And what do you want? He asked, his voice barely audible. In answer, Harriet reached up and gently touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. To know the man who looks at broken horses and sees possibility instead of failure. To understand how someone can face such adversity and emerge stronger rather than bitter. For a breathless moment, Finn remained perfectly still beneath her touch. Then, with exquisite care, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, a kiss so gentle it might have been a question. Harriet answered by drawing closer, her hands sliding to the nape of his neck as the kiss deepened into something that sent warmth coursing through her entire being. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing unevenly. This isn't wise, Finn murmured, though he made no move to step away. Wisdom is overrated, Harriet replied with a small laugh. I nearly died in quicksand. It makes one reconsider what risks are truly worth taking. Before Finn could respond, the meeting hall door opened, spilling light and laughter into the night. They stepped apart just as Eliza emerged. There you are, she exclaimed, her knowing smile suggesting she had a good idea of what she'd interrupted. They're about to serve the desserts. Mrs. Baker made her famous apple pie specially for our new teacher. "We'll be right in," Harriet assured her, grateful for the darkness that hid her flushed cheeks. After Eliza retreated, Finn offered Harriet his arm. "Shall we, Miss Norwood? Wouldn't want to miss Mrs. Baker's pie. It's legendary in these parts." As they returned to the hall, Harriet felt lighter than she had in years, as though some burden she hadn't even recognized had been lifted. The evening stretched before them, full of possibility, much like the vast Colorado sky above. The weeks following the social saw a gradual but unmistakable change in the relationship between Harriet and Finn. He began appearing regularly at the schoolhouse, initially under the pretext of minor repairs or delivering firewood, but soon these visits extended to long conversations after the children had departed. Sometimes he would bring interesting specimens, unusual rocks, or pressed wildflowers for her natural science lessons, and occasionally he would stay to listen as she practiced the school's battered piano. Colorado City buzzed with speculation about the unlikely pair, but Harriet found herself caring less about public opinion with each passing day. There was something liberating about frontier life that allowed her to shed the rigid social constraints of her Eastern upbringing. One crisp September afternoon, Finn arrived at the schoolhouse with an unexpected proposal. "Thought you might like to see my place," he said as he helped her stack the primers. "Sunday after church, if you're agreeable. Eliza could come as chaperone, keep the gossips at bay." Harriet's heart quickened at the invitation. "I'd like that very much," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. "Though I admit I'm most curious about these remarkable horses you rehabilitate." "Got a new one just last week," Finn said, a hint of excitement in his usually measured tone. "Cavalry mount, badly treated after the war. Owner was about to put him down, but I've seen worse cases turn around." The following Sunday found Harriet and Eliza bumping along in Finn's wagon on the road leading out of town. After about 5 miles, they turned onto a narrow track that wound through a stand of pines before opening onto a meadow cradled between gentle hills. A modest but well-maintained cabin stood near a clear stream, with several outbuildings and corrals spread out behind it. "It's beautiful," Harriet exclaimed, taking in the peaceful setting with its backdrop of distant mountains. "How long have you lived here?" "Purchased it with my army pension when I came back from the war," Finn replied, helping both women down from the wagon. "Was just bare land then. Built everything you see." "With one arm," Eliza added proudly, "though he'd never tell you that himself." "Had plenty of help," Finn corrected, looking uncomfortable with the praise. "Neighbors pitched in. That's how it works out here." He gave them a tour of the property, showing particular pride in his vegetable garden and orchard of young apple trees. The small herd of cattle looked healthy, but it was clearly the horses that were his passion. In several pastures, horses of various colors and breeds grazed contentedly. "These are the graduates," Finn explained, "ready to be sold or returned to their owners. Some I keep as breeding stock." He pointed to a magnificent black stallion watching them imperiously from the highest pasture. "That's Midnight, best stud I've ever worked with. Sire's foals with both beauty and brains." Finally, they approached a separate corral some distance from the others. Inside, a rangy chestnut horse with a white blaze paced nervously, his coat dull and ribs showing despite evidence of recent care. "This is the cavalry mount?" Harriet asked, noting the animal's wary posture and rolling eyes. Finn nodded. "Name's Valor. Served at Appomattox according to his papers. After the war, ended up with a freight company. Driver beat him senseless for every minor infraction until he became too dangerous to handle." His voice held carefully controlled anger. "Some men shouldn't be allowed near animals." Harriet watched as Finn entered the corral, his movements deliberate and calm. The horse snorted and backed away, but Finn simply stood still, talking in a low, soothing voice. After several minutes, The animal's posture relaxed slightly, though he kept his distance. "Progress," Finn remarked as he rejoined them. "Yesterday he wouldn't let me in the corral at all." "How do you rehabilitate them?" Harriet asked as they walked back toward the cabin, where Eliza was already setting out the picnic lunch they'd brought. "Patience, mostly," Finn replied, "and understanding that bad behavior usually comes from fear or pain, not meanness. Horse has to learn to trust again before anything else can happen." "Is that true for people as well?" Harriet asked quietly. Finn glanced at her sharply. "Some wounds go deeper than others," he finally said. "But yes, I reckon the principle's the same." After a pleasant lunch in the shade of a large cottonwood tree, Eliza announced her intention to rest on the cabin's porch swing with the novel she'd brought along. The transparent attempt to give them some privacy brought color to Harriet's cheeks, but she gratefully accepted Finn's invitation to walk down to the stream. They followed the water's edge in comfortable silence for a while, the burbling current and occasional birdsong the only sounds. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees, dappling the ground with shifting patterns of light and shadow. "I understand now," Harriet said finally, "why you prefer this to town. There's a peace here that seems impossible to find elsewhere." "Took me a while to appreciate it," Finn admitted. "When I first came back from the war, the silence was almost unbearable after months of constant noise and danger. Used to ride for hours just to escape my own thoughts. And now it's home." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Harriet, I need to be honest with you about something." Her heart stuttered at his serious tone. "Of course. I'm not the man you think I am," he said, his expression troubled. "After I lost my arm, I wasn't brave or stoic. I was angry, bitter, drank too much, fought too often, blamed God, blamed the Confederacy, blamed my commanding officers." His jaw tightened. "Nearly killed a man in Denver who made a comment about my empty sleeve." Harriet listened silently, understanding the courage it took for him to reveal this darker chapter of his past. "That night, lying in a jail cell, I realized I had two choices," Finn continued. "Could let the war take everything from me, not just my arm but my soul, or I could find a way forward." He gestured toward the ranch. "This was my way forward, working with animals that needed healing as much as I did." "Thank you for telling me," Harriet said softly, reaching out to take his hand. "But it doesn't change how I see you, Finn. If anything, knowing what you overcame makes me admire you more." He looked down at their joined hands, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "There's something between us, Harriet. Something I never expected to find again, if I'm being truthful. But I need you to understand what you'd be taking on with a man like me." "I believe I understand better than you think," she replied. "My father lost his leg in a factory accident when I was 12. I watched my mother care for him through his darkest days, and I saw how their love deepened through that trial rather than diminishing." She squeezed his hand. "I've never viewed physical wholeness as a requirement for a good and worthy life. Even so, a schoolteacher could do better than a one-armed horse trainer with a troubled past," he said, though hope had begun to replace the resignation in his eyes. "Perhaps I don't want to do better," Harriet replied with spirit. "Perhaps I've found exactly what I want." Finn's answer was to draw her into his arms, his kiss conveying everything words could not: tenderness, passion, and a promise of devotion that made Harriet's heart soar with possibilities. As autumn painted the Colorado landscape in brilliant hues of red and gold, Harriet and Finn's courtship became the favorite topic of conversation in Colorado City. They made little attempt to hide their growing attachment, though both maintained a propriety that gave even the most dedicated gossips little to criticize. Finn became a regular visitor to the school, sometimes demonstrating practical skills to the older boys or bringing an especially gentle horse for the children to meet. Mr. Archer's going to marry Miss Norwood, isn't he? 12-year-old Rebecca Wilson asked bluntly one day as Harriet was dismissing her class. That's a very personal question, Rebecca, Harriet replied, trying to maintain her composure. Well, my ma says it's about time he found himself a good woman, even if she is from back east. The girl continued undeterred. Says you're good for him. Makes him smile more. The observation warmed Harriet's heart, for she had indeed noticed the transformation in Finn over the past months. The guarded, solitary man who had rescued her from Quicksand had gradually opened himself to joy again, his smiles coming more readily, his laughter a treasured gift. That evening, bundled against the October chill, they sat together on the boarding house porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in fiery splendor. Received a letter today, Finn said, breaking a comfortable silence. Army buddy of mine in Kansas has some promising stock he's looking to sell. Thought I'd ride out next week to take a look. How long will you be gone? Harriet asked, trying to hide her disappointment at the prospect of his absence. Week, maybe 2, he replied, his hand finding hers in the gathering darkness. Unless you've got a reason for me to hurry back sooner. Harriet turned to look at him, surprised by the teasing note in his voice. What sort of reason did you have in mind, Mr. Archer? Been thinking about that cabin of mine, he said casually, though she could detect an undercurrent of tension. Seems too big for just one person. Been wondering if perhaps someone else might consider sharing it. Permanently, like. Harriet's breath caught as she realized what he was saying. Are you proposing to me, Finn Archer? Doing a poor job of it, apparently, he said with a soft laugh. Then, to her astonishment, he shifted from the bench to one knee before her, still holding her hand. Harriet Norwood, you stepped into Quicksand and somehow managed to pull me out of the mire I'd been stuck in for years. I love you more than I ever thought possible after all I've been through. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Tears sprang to Harriet's eyes as joy washed through her. Yes, she whispered, then repeated more firmly. Yes, with all my heart. Finn rose and gathered her into his arm, his kiss sealing their promise as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above Colorado City. News of their engagement spread through town with remarkable speed, bringing an outpouring of goodwill that touched both Harriet and Finn deeply. The school board, after initial concerns about losing their teacher, agreed that Harriet could continue in her position even after marriage, provided she maintained her excellent standards. Seems the West is more progressive than Philadelphia in some ways, Harriet remarked to Eliza as they discussed wedding preparations. At home, I would have been required to resign immediately. Necessity breeds practicality, Eliza replied with a smile. We can't afford to lose good teachers over outdated notions. Besides, everyone can see how happy you and Finn make each other. That counts for something out here. As promised, Finn departed for Kansas the following week, leaving Harriet with a bittersweet mixture of anticipation for their future and loneliness in his absence. She threw herself into her teaching duties and wedding preparations, determined to make the time pass quickly. 12 days after his departure, Harriet was writing multiplication tables on the blackboard when a commotion outside drew her attention. Looking through the schoolhouse window, she saw Finn dismounting from his horse, surrounded by what appeared to be a small herd of ponies. Class dismissed early today, she announced to the children's delight, hastily grabbing her shawl as she hurried outside. Finn's face lit up when he saw her, and he strode forward to meet her halfway, lifting her off her feet in an enthusiastic embrace that drew cheers from her students. Couldn't stay away another day, he murmured against her hair before setting her down. Missed you something fierce. What are all these horses? Harriet asked, noting the varied colors and sizes of the animals being corralled by 2 young men she didn't recognize. Part of why I went to Kansas, Finn explained, keeping his arm around her waist. "Army's selling off surplus mounts, and I got a good price on this lot. Thought we could start a breeding program, maybe supply horses to the stage lines." "We," Harriet repeated, touched by his inclusion of her in his plans. "Partners in everything from now on," he said simply. "If you're agreeable." Her answer was written plainly in her smile. The wedding took place on a clear November Sunday, with nearly the entire population of Colorado City in attendance. The small church was decorated with pine boughs and late-blooming wildflowers that Finn's ranch hands had scoured the hills to find. Harriet wore a new dress of ivory silk ordered specially from Denver, with Eliza's pearl earrings as her something borrowed. As she walked down the aisle to where Finn waited beside the minister, Harriet felt a profound sense of rightness that overshadowed any lingering doubts. The man watching her approach with undisguised adoration might be missing an arm, but he possessed a strength of character and capacity for love that made him more complete than any other man she'd ever known. "Dearly beloved," the minister began once Harriet reached Finn's side, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who found each other against considerable odds. Some might call their meeting chance, but I prefer to see the hand of Providence at work when a schoolteacher from Philadelphia and a Colorado rancher are brought together through such unusual circumstances." Finn and Harriet exchanged simple, heartfelt vows, their voices steady with conviction. When Finn slid the gold band onto her finger, a task he had practiced diligently to perform smoothly with his single hand, Harriet felt tears of happiness spring to her eyes. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed an army. Finn surprised everyone, including Harriet, by leading her onto the dance floor for a specially rehearsed waltz that he had secretly practiced with Eliza's help. "You've been planning this," Harriet accused softly as they moved together with unexpected grace. "Wanted to give you a proper first dance as Mrs. Archer," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "Even if it's the only one I can manage." "It's perfect," she assured him, leaning her head against his shoulder as they completed their circuit of the floor to enthusiastic applause. Later, as they rode toward the ranch in the wagon decorated with ribbons and good luck tokens by the townspeople, Harriet felt a wonderful sense of anticipation. The cabin had been prepared for their arrival, with Eliza and several other women having spent the previous day cleaning and arranging everything for the newlyweds' comfort. "Nervous?" Finn asked as they approached, the lights of the cabin glowing welcomingly in the darkness. "A little," Harriet admitted, "but not afraid." "Never known you to be afraid of anything," he said with admiration. "Not quicksand, not frontier life, not even taking on a husband that some might consider damaged goods." Harriet turned to face him fully. "Finn Archer, if you ever refer to yourself as damaged goods again, we will have our first marital disagreement," she said firmly. "You are the man I love, all of you, exactly as you are." His smile in response was tender and a bit odd, as though he still couldn't quite believe his good fortune. The ranch hands had discreetly made themselves scarce, leaving the main cabin empty when Finn carried Harriet across the threshold. A fire crackled in the hearth, and someone had placed a vase of dried autumn flowers on the table alongside a bottle of good whiskey and 2 glasses. "Welcome home, Mrs. Archer," Finn said, setting her gently on her feet but keeping his arm around her waist. "Home," Harriet repeated, savoring the word. "I never thought I'd find it so far from where I began." "Any regrets?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in the question. In answer, Harriet reached up to touch his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw before drawing him down for a kiss that left no room for doubt. "None whatsoever," she whispered against his lips. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." The winter of 1875–1876 proved to be one of the coldest in Colorado's memory, with snow piling deep around the Archer Ranch and temperatures plummeting well below freezing for weeks at a time. Yet inside the snug cabin, Harriet discovered a warmth that had nothing to do with the constantly maintained fire. Married life suited her better than she could have imagined. She continued teaching at the schoolhouse, riding into town with Finn on days when the weather permitted and staying with Eliza when storms made the daily journey impossible. The children had adjusted quickly to addressing her as Mrs. Archer, though some of the younger ones occasionally slipped back to Miss Norwood in moments of excitement. Finn thrived as well, his natural reticence giving way to an easy companionship that deepened with each passing day. He took genuine interest in Harriet's teaching, often discussing her more challenging students and offering insights based on his own observations. In turn, Harriet found herself increasingly involved in the ranch operations, learning to keep the accounts and even developing a knack for spotting which horses would respond best to Finn's patient training methods. Their physical relationship blossomed from initial shyness into a passionate connection that continually surprised and delighted them both. Finn's initial concerns about his disability proved unfounded as they discovered the unique rhythm of their intimacy, with Harriet never once making him feel anything less than wholly desirable. By early spring, as the snow began to retreat and the first green shoots appeared in the meadows, Harriet suspected that their love had created something new. Her suspicion was confirmed by Dr. Jenkins during a visit to town for supplies. "Finn," she said that evening as they sat before the fire, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against him, "I have something important to tell you." He set aside the book he'd been reading aloud, a ritual they'd established during the long winter evenings. "What is it, love? You've seemed preoccupied since we got back from town." Harriet took a deep breath, suddenly nervous despite her certainty that he would welcome the news. "Dr. Jenkins confirmed what I've suspected for a few weeks now. We're going to have a baby, likely sometime in late October." Finn went utterly still, his expression one of stunned disbelief that slowly transformed into wondering joy. "A baby? You're sure?" Harriet nodded, smiling through tears of happiness. "Quite sure. Are you pleased?" In answer, Finn gathered her close, his embrace conveying everything words could not. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Pleased doesn't begin to cover it. Harriet, I never thought, after everything, to have this chance at a family with you." "You'll be a wonderful father," she assured him, understanding the doubts he couldn't quite articulate. "Our child will be so loved, and so lucky to have you as their mother," Finn replied, resting his hand gently over her still flat stomach. "I love you, Harriet Archer, more than I ever thought possible." As spring advanced into summer, the news of their expected child spread through Colorado City, bringing a fresh wave of goodwill and support. Eliza immediately began knitting baby clothes, while other women from town offered advice and hand-me-down cradles and blankets. The ranch hands, initially awkward around their boss's visibly pregnant wife, soon became protective guardians, insisting on handling any task that might strain Harriet in the slightest. By mutual agreement, Harriet completed the school term but declined to return for the fall session, recommending a qualified replacement who had recently arrived from St. Louis. Instead, she focused on preparing their home for the baby's arrival, transforming a small adjoining room into a nursery with Finn's enthusiastic assistance. "Do you have a preference?" Finn asked one evening as he put the finishing touches on a cradle he had crafted with meticulous care. "Boy or girl, I mean?" Harriet considered the question as she folded tiny garments into a chest of drawers. "I've been thinking about that. I believe I'd be equally happy with either, though for different reasons." She smiled at her husband's curious expression. "A son might follow in your footsteps with the horses, but a daughter would benefit tremendously from having a father who treats women with such respect and consideration. Finn's face softened at her words. Just want them healthy, he said, and to have your intelligence and courage, and your integrity and perseverance, Harriet added, crossing the room to kiss him. Either way, this child will have the best of both of us. The baby, as it happened, arrived 2 weeks earlier than expected. On a mid-October morning, while Finn was in the far pasture checking on a pregnant mare, Harriet felt the first unmistakable contractions. She calmly sent one of the ranch hands to fetch her husband while another rode for Dr. Jenkins and a third helped her prepare the bedroom according to previously discussed plans. Finn returned at a gallop, his face pale with concern that only intensified when he saw Harriet's drawn expression as another contraction seized her. Should have stayed closer to the house, he berated himself as he helped her through the pain. Known it was getting close to time. Don't be ridiculous, Harriet managed once the contraction passed. Babies come when they're ready, not according to our schedules. She squeezed his hand reassuringly. Everything is proceeding normally, just more quickly than we anticipated. Dr. Jenkins arrived an hour later, by which time Harriet's labor had progressed significantly. The doctor examined her with professional efficiency before pronouncing everything in order. First babies often take their time, he told them, but occasionally they're in a hurry to meet the world. This little one seems to be the impatient sort. The next few hours passed in a blur of intense sensations for Harriet. Throughout it all, Finn remained steadfastly by her side, supporting her through each contraction, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, and murmuring encouragements that helped anchor her through the most difficult moments. As sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues outside their window, Harriet gave a final tremendous push, and their child entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to both parents' eyes. You have a son, Dr. Jenkins announced, quickly cleaning and wrapping the infant before placing him in Harriet's eager arms. A fine, healthy boy. Harriet gazed down at the tiny face, overwhelmed by a love so powerful it took her breath away. The baby had a shock of dark hair like his father's, and, when he briefly opened his eyes, Harriet glimpsed the same striking blue. He's perfect, she whispered, looking up at Finn, who seemed transfixed by the sight of his wife and child together. May I? Finn asked uncertainly, his gaze never leaving the baby. Of course, Harriet replied, carefully transferring their son to his father's arm. Finn cradled the infant with surprising confidence, his expression one of absolute wonder. Hello, little man, he said softly. Been waiting to meet you for quite some time. The baby quieted at the sound of his voice, tiny fingers reflexively grasping at the fabric of Finn's shirt. He knows his father, Harriet observed, her heart so full she thought it might burst with happiness. Later, after Dr. Jenkins had departed with instructions for Harriet's recovery and the baby's care, the new family settled into a peaceful quiet. The infant nursed contentedly while Finn sat beside them on the bed, his arm protectively around Harriet's shoulders. What shall we name him? Harriet asked, tracing a gentle finger along their son's soft cheek. Was thinking maybe William, Finn suggested. After your father, if that would please you. Touched by his thoughtfulness, Harriet nodded. William Finnegan Archer. A strong name for a boy who will grow up knowing his own strength comes from more than just his body. Finn's eyes shone with emotion as he pressed a kiss to her temple. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. As young William grew from infant to toddler, the Archer Ranch flourished alongside him. Finn's breeding program proved remarkably successful, with buyers coming from as far as Denver and Santa Fe to purchase his meticulously trained horses. The additional income allowed for improvements to the property, including an extension to the cabin that gave the expanding family more comfortable living space. Harriet divided her time between caring for William and helping with the ranch accounts, occasionally substituting at the schoolhouse when needed but primarily focusing on creating a warm and stimulating home environment. She started a small lending library in town, donating books and encouraging literacy among both children and adults who had never had formal education. William, or Billy as he was affectionately called, showed an early affinity for both books and horses, much to his parents' delight. By age 3, he was sitting confidently on his own pony, guided by his father's expert instruction, and could recognize most letters of the alphabet thanks to his mother's patient teaching. The boy showed no confusion or concern about his father's missing arm, accepting it as simply part of who Finn was. When a visiting relative once awkwardly tried to explain to Billy that his father was different, the child looked genuinely perplexed. "Papa can do everything," he declared with absolute conviction. "He's the strongest man in the whole territory." This unwavering faith touched Finn deeply, strengthening his determination to never allow his disability to limit what he could provide for his family in terms of both material support and emotional presence. In the spring of 1880, shortly after William's 3rd birthday, Harriet discovered she was expecting their second child. The news brought joy tempered with practical concerns about managing the ranch with 2 young children. "Perhaps it's time to consider hiring more permanent help," Finn suggested one evening as they discussed the future. "The business can support it now, and it would give you more assistance around here." "What about Danny Miller?" Harriet proposed, referring to the 16-year-old son of a neighboring rancher who had shown considerable aptitude with horses during occasional work at their place. "He's reliable, eager to learn, and his family could use the steady income." Finn nodded thoughtfully. "Good thinking. Boy's got a natural way with the animals. Could train him up proper. Maybe even make him foreman someday when he's got more experience." This practical approach to challenges characterized their partnership, a blending of Harriet's thoughtful planning and Finn's hard-earned wisdom that generally led to solutions benefiting everyone involved. Their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Finn's sister, arrived in December 1880 during a gentle snowfall that blanketed the ranch in pristine white. Unlike her brother's hurried entrance, Elizabeth took her time, finally making her appearance after nearly 20 hours of labor that left Harriet exhausted but triumphant. "She has your eyes," Finn observed as he held his daughter for the first time, marveling at the clear hazel gaze that seemed to study him intently. "And your determination, I reckon. Girl knows her own mind already." William approached his new sister with solemn curiosity, peering into the bundle of blankets with wide-eyed wonder. "She's very small, Mama," he observed. "Was I this small?" "Even smaller," Harriet assured him, drawing her firstborn close with her free arm. "But you'll help her grow big and strong, won't you? That's what big brothers do." The boy nodded, accepting this responsibility with the seriousness that characterized his approach to all new tasks. "I'll teach her about horses," he promised, "when she's bigger." As the family adjusted to life with 2 children, Colorado itself continued to change around them. The territory had achieved statehood in 1876, bringing new settlers, expanded railroad connections, and increasing development that gradually transformed Colorado City from a frontier outpost to a growing town with aspirations of sophistication. Yet the essential character of the Archer family remained constant: their home, a haven of love and acceptance, where strengths were celebrated and weaknesses supported without judgment. Finn's disability, once so central to how others perceived him, had become simply one aspect of a complex, capable man whose worth was measured by his actions rather than his physical completeness. In the summer of 1883, as they celebrated their 8th wedding anniversary with a rare overnight trip to Colorado Springs, while Eliza watched the children, Harriet and Finn found a quiet moment alone on the hotel balcony, gazing at the majestic silhouette of Pikes Peak against the darkening sky. "Do you ever miss Philadelphia?" Finn asked, his arm around her waist as they stood together in comfortable closeness. The theaters, the shops, all the things the city offers that we can't provide out here? Harriet considered the question honestly before shaking her head. I miss certain people occasionally, old friends, distant relatives, but not the place itself, nor the life I led there. She turned to face him fully. I found my true self in Colorado. Found you. That's worth more than all the city conveniences combined. Never ceases to amaze me, Finn said, his voice soft with wonder even after all their years together. That day by Rattlesnake Gulch. If I'd taken a different trail, if you hadn't called out when you did, then fate would have found another way to bring us together, Harriet replied with certainty. I believe that completely. Finn's smile held all the love and gratitude that had deepened between them through the seasons of their marriage. Remember what you said that day, after I pulled you from the quicksand? That you were twice the man of any other, Harriet recalled, reaching up to touch his beloved face. I meant it then, but I understand it far better now. It wasn't about what you overcame, Finn. It was about who you are at your core, the strength of character that allowed you to build something beautiful from adversity. He drew her closer, his kiss conveying emotions that even after years of marriage could still leave her breathless. When they finally parted, Finn rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the cool evening air. Best thing that ever happened to me was finding you stuck in that mud, he murmured with the gentle teasing that had become a cherished part of their relationship. Harriet laughed softly. And the best thing that ever happened to me was being rescued by a stubborn, one-armed cowboy who refused to let me give up on myself or him. As they returned to their embrace, the first stars appeared above the Colorado mountains, witnesses to a love that had begun in desperate circumstances but had flourished against all odds, proving that true wholeness comes not from physical perfection but from the courage to open one's heart fully to life's possibilities. In the years that followed, the Archer Ranch grew into one of the most respected horse breeding operations in Colorado. William, following in his father's footsteps, developed a particular talent for identifying promising breeding stock, while Elizabeth, much to everyone's surprise, revealed a remarkable aptitude for the business aspects of ranching, keeping the accounts with a precision that impressed even the bankers in Colorado Springs. The family welcomed a third child in 1885, another son they named James, who from earliest childhood showed signs of the quiet determination that had seen both his parents through their greatest challenges. The three Archer children, so different in temperament yet united by the strong values instilled by their parents, became known throughout the region for their intelligence, work ethic, and the natural confidence that came from growing up in a home where limitations were never allowed to define potential. Finn, whose expertise with difficult horses had once been his sole claim to respect, became a valued voice in local governance as Colorado City continued to develop. His practical approach to problem-solving and unwavering integrity earned him the trust of neighbors who elected him to the town council despite his initial reluctance to serve. Harriet, meanwhile, expanded her educational initiatives beyond their original scope, establishing a scholarship fund to help promising students from the area continue their education in Denver or even farther east. She never lost her passion for teaching, though her classroom had expanded from the small schoolhouse to include anyone in the community with a desire to learn. Through it all, their partnership remained the foundation upon which everything else was built, a marriage of equals who recognized that strength often comes disguised as vulnerability, and that love is less about finding perfection than about discovering the courage to embrace life with all its unexpected turns. On the 20th anniversary of the day Finn had pulled Harriet from the quicksand, they returned to Rattlesnake Gulch, now part of their expanded property, with their children and grandchildren for a picnic. The dangerous quicksand had long since been fenced off and marked with warning signs, but the memory of that fateful encounter remained vivid in both their minds. Hard to believe it all started right here, Finn remarked as they stood slightly apart from the younger generations who were spreading blankets and unpacking food. At 65, his hair had turned silver, and lines of experience marked his face, but his blue eyes remained as keen and perceptive as ever. Sometimes the most significant moments of our lives don't announce themselves as such when they're happening, Harriet observed, slipping her hand into his. At 57, she retained the spirit and intelligence that had first caught his attention, though time had softened her auburn hair to a dignified gray. From across the clearing, Elizabeth called for their attention, gathering everyone for a group photograph to commemorate the occasion. As they posed together, 3 generations of archers standing proud against the backdrop of the Colorado mountains, Harriet felt a profound sense of gratitude for the unexpected path her life had taken. Later, as the celebration continued and twilight began to settle over the land they had nurtured together, Finn drew her away from the others for a moment of privacy. "Got something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket to produce a small velvet pouch. "Had it made special." Curious, Harriet opened the drawstring and tipped the contents into her palm. A delicate gold locket gleamed in the fading light, beautifully engraved with their intertwined initials. When she pressed the tiny clasp, it opened to reveal a miniature photograph of them on their wedding day on one side, and a current portrait of their entire family on the other. "Oh, Finn," she whispered, emotion making it difficult to speak. "It's beautiful." "Thought it fitting," he said, his own voice rough with feeling. "Past and present together, just like us." He carefully took the locket and placed it around her neck, the chain settling perfectly against her collar. "I love you, Harriet Archer," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of decades shared. "Have since the moment you looked up at me from that quicksand and saw a whole man instead of a broken one." "And I love you," she replied, reaching up to touch his face with the tenderness that had never diminished, "for showing me that sometimes we must sink before we can truly rise." As they rejoined their family, the first stars appeared in the vast Colorado sky, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning and had illuminated every step of their remarkable journey together. It was a journey that had proven, beyond any doubt, that love sees with clearer eyes than fear, and that the truest measure of a person's worth has nothing to do with physical wholeness and everything to do with the capacity of the human heart to overcome, to endure, and above all, to love without reservation.